Today we're continuing on with our NHL offseason plan series. We're reviewing the 18th best team from the regular season, the New York Rangers. They're going to be a very interesting team to watch this offseason. What moves will they make? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're now on to team number 18, working our way up from 31 up through 1 for the NHL offseason plan series. So every team's getting their own dedicated video to take a look at their cap space, what contracts are expiring, and what trades or signings they're expected to make this year to prepare for next season. So we're going to kick things off here first by recapping last season and see how things went for the New York Rangers. So as you can see, the Rangers finished with a record of 37, 28, and 5 for 79 points, gives them a winning percentage of .564. Now, of course, in case you're wondering as well, these teams are ranked according to winning percentage, not just points. So you may have some of the order here that's slightly altered a bit. But the Rangers overall made some good strides, I thought, this year. They certainly have a lot of young talent. They're a team on the rise, and I thought they did pretty well considering where they were just a matter of a couple of years ago. Now, looking at their statistics, they scored 233 goals while only allowing 220, so they were plus 13, so that was pretty solid. Their special teams were somewhat decent on some respects here. The power play was pretty solid, 22.9%, but the penalty kill wasn't overly great, being 23rd best at 77.4, so it's not the worst in the league, but far from the best as well. Now, the Rangers are a team, like I said, with a lot of young talent. They're going to be a very interesting team to watch. I think they have a number of players that either need to be re-signed or replaced. They have the draft coming up. They're going to be a fun and exciting team to keep your eye on. Now, let's now take a look at what they have for cap space. We'll follow that up with their contract expiration. So we'll look at who are their RFAs and who are their UFAs and discuss whether or not those players are signed or replaced or in some cases maybe even traded. So let's take a look here from CapFriendly.com. You can see that the New York Rangers currently possess $14.39 million in salary cap space, and they have 15 players under contract for next season. So teams usually carry 22 to 23 players on their active NHL roster. So that's going to give you anywhere from another 7 to 8 players that need to be looked after here with a new contract. So now let's take a look at those expiring contracts. As we mentioned, who are the RFAs and UFAs that they either need to sign or replace this coming offseason? Let's start here with the unrestricted free agents because it's a little bit of a shorter list and certainly a little easier to get through. We have guys like Greg McKegg, Michael Haley, and Jesper Fast are the UFAs. There is a possibility that none of them might be back. I would think McKegg and Haley almost definitely do not return. Jesper Fast is a player that I'm sure the Rangers would like to retain. It just might be tricky given their overall salary cap situation. Now, I understand, looking at what we just looked at here, that they have over $14 million in space, but when you factor in some of the other players that they need to sign, it might be tricky to do. I know Jesper Fast is a guy who's can play well for them. He's a popular teammate. He's good in the room. I think the Rangers will do their best to figure out retaining his services. But like I said, it's going to boil down to money, and I'm not convinced 100% that they're going to be able to do it, but it boils down to what other moves they make, because some of the other things we're going to discuss here might give them a little bit more salary cap flexibility. Now, looking at their list of restricted free agents, we have some key players here. So these contracts are going to be quite interesting to see how they turn out. First up, we've got Ryan Strome, their current number 2 center iceman. Obviously, Ryan Strome, I think, has played pretty well during his time in the Big Apple. Obviously, this is his third NHL team after starting with the Islanders and then the Oilers. And he's probably played some of his best hockey while with the Rangers organization. He's also gotten to play with some higher-end talent as well, which I do feel has somewhat padded his offensive statistics some. Not to take anything away from Strome's game. I do like how he's played. But I think when you're playing a lot with a guy like Panarin, it does, inflate your stats a little bit. I'm sure based on how his career has gone so far, he's probably looking at a longer-term deal, ideally, with a decent amount of money. Obviously, a lot of number 2 centers are in that $6 million range, and the Rangers need to ask themselves if they want to sign and lock him up for an extended time at that kind of price tag. So that's going to be a key one to keep your eye on, and we'll discuss him a little further here in the next segment. Now, we also have Brendan Lemieux, who certainly I feel likely does get re-signed. He's not going to cost too expensive. You get Philip DiGiuseppe, probably offered a qualifying offer, but difficult to say exactly what his role is next year. Then you've got defenseman Tony DeAngelo, who's going to prove to be expensive again. He just signed a 1-year contract last year, a short term for not a lot of money, and again outperformed his contract. So that is going to be tricky based on their overall cap situation and where their blue line stands. So we'll discuss him shortly here as well. Then they have goaltender Alexander Georgiev, who I do feel will be part of the goaltending tandem for the future. So I think he likely gets signed, and his deal should not be too complicated or too costly to get done for the Rangers. Now, next up is going to be the real interesting fun part. We're going to talk about what we call the most burning questions around this franchise heading into the offseason. What moves are we going to see when it comes to trades, free agency, and of course with this team we can't help but talk about the 2020 NHL Draft, which is going to be number one on this list, and it's going to be the first thing that we really encounter this offseason. The Rangers were extremely fortunate to be selected by the draft lottery process to get the first overall selection. They are having to pick Alexis Lafreniere. I mean, what an honor and a privilege it is for that franchise. Obviously, Lafreniere probably did not expect to be going to a team like the Rangers based on how the standings were and everything. Nobody thought it would be a play-in team that would get that first overall pick. So it certainly created a lot of drama for the NHL, a lot of interest around that whole process, and the TV ratings especially too, where there wasn't a lot happening in the hockey world for an extended time. But the Rangers were lucky, so they're going to go draft Lafreniere first and foremost. So it's a pretty simple task. Just don't screw it up. Make sure you take Lafreniere. I would not trade that pick unless you're offered a serious boatload of players and picks that you just cannot refuse. And I just don't see any NHL teams ponying up to make that kind of deal. So drafting Lafreniere, number one on their priority list. After that, we start getting into the RFAs, and some of these guys like DeAngelo and Strome could very well find themselves traded. Now, Ryan Strome, like I mentioned, good player, played well for the Rangers. Do they want to commit to him at least 3 or 4 years or even longer at around $6 million or maybe even $5-6 million a year? I'm not sure they want to do that. I mean, Mika Zibanejad has been pretty solid in their number one center role. I'm just not convinced that they want to pay that kind of money to him, so it would not be shocking if he was indeed traded and they try to find another number two center. I'm not quite sure if Filipino's ready to be elevated to that role. Long term, I can see him maybe fitting in that slot, but for right now, he's probably on the third line for another season. But I can see a scenario unfold where the Rangers might consider trading Strome. Now, when it comes to DeAngelo, I think he's pretty much a goner for sure because of the fact he's played well enough on an offensive standpoint to garner a pretty good contract as well. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to get paid, but I can see him getting at least $4 or $5 million, maybe even a little bit more. Like, he's played pretty well offensively. Defensively, there's still a lot of holes in his game. He's not really known for his defensive prowess, but to be the third best right shot defenseman on your team, you just can't be making that kind of money. Most third pair D in the NHL are making around $1 million or $800,000-900,000 to play 10-12 minutes a night. And that's not what he's going to do. I mean, you've already got Jacob Trouba and Adam Fox ahead of him. I do feel that Adam Fox is a overall much better defenseman overall and will be legit top four, maybe eventually even be the top pair guy for the Rangers longer term. Like, he's that good. So I don't see DeAngelo sticking around and them committing that much money to him based on how he slots in the lineup. Now, if the things were a little different with their D pairs and he was definitely going to be top four, okay, maybe you have to settle down and pay him a more appropriate number. But I can see DeAngelo being on the move in that regard. So when it comes to looking after their RFAs, I think if we're gonna see trades, it's probably gonna happen before qualifying offers have to be tendered, or possibly shortly thereafter. Because even though the qualifying offer goes out, it doesn't mean any player has to accept, and it doesn't mean a deal is going to get done right away. They could end up going through arbitration as well. So I think we're going to see a lot of activity, and these are two key players for the Rangers that I fully suspect would be the most likely to be traded. Now, of course, the next big burning question they have to settle is the future of Henrik Lundqvist. Is it time for Hank to move on? And probably the answer to that is, definitely it is. They're ready to hand things over to Igor Shesterkin and Alexander Georgiev. They have the two guys between the pipes that are more than capable. Hank has a $8.5 million cap hit. he's at the end of the road for his career. Whether or not he continues to play somewhere else is debatable. We had reports just in the last few days out of Libor Hayek, one of his teammates, and doing an interview in the Czech Republic in the offseason here, indicating that he said goodbye to everybody and basically was talking about the fact that it was likely his last game as a Ranger. So, unfortunately, I think it's come to an end. Now, the Rangers will definitely try to trade him if they can. The problem here is that he has a full no-trade clause and can complicate things, because unless he accepts the trade, they're kind of stuck. So he might force their hand to go through down the road of a buyout, which gives him a little bit of cap relief right away, but it gives him the ability to be an unrestricted free agent, so he can sign wherever he wants. And since he's getting 2/3 of his money from the Rangers, he could accept a much cheaper contract from another team if he's able to get that. I don't know what his future holds, but I don't see a scenario where he returns to the Rangers next year. They will be able to save money on goaltending for a little while until Shesterkin comes out of his ELC, and then by then he's likely going to be ready for a mega raise, because I do have a lot of faith that he's going to turn out to be a stud goalie longer term. Another big question this team is facing this offseason as well is the future of Elias Andersson. Now, not nearly as important as these other moves by no means. I mean, selecting Lafreniere, deciding Strome and D'Angelo's fate in Lundqvist, much more important than Elias Andersson, but obviously it looks as though he's likely could be done with the Rangers. He's over in Sweden. Could play over there another season. I'm not really sure that there's going to get a ton of interest right now. So more than likely nothing happens with Andersson. Maybe they work something out that he plays over there, tries to increase his value, and they find a new home for him. Maybe for next season. It's difficult to say, but another player who could be moved if the right offer comes along. I'm just, like we saw with Jesse Puljujarvi last year, not convinced that's something we're going to see this offseason, but it certainly is more than possible. The only other question, too, around the Ryan Strome in the center position is if he is traded, who comes back to fill that kind of role? Because obviously they want to find somebody that they're certainly more comfortable with in that number 2 spot longer term. There really isn't much in free agency, especially when it comes to the center position. So not quite clear exactly what that deal could be. I mean, there's other somewhat comparable players that are on the market. Maybe we could see a swap. For example, like Montreal has guys like Philip Deneau and Max Domi that are reportedly on the block. Maybe we see a deal with a team like that. Difficult to say, but either way, I do expect Jeff Gorton and the Rangers to be busy. I do expect them to return next year being even better and more exciting. You think about the guys like Lafreniere and Capo Caco just joined the team as well. You just signed Panarin to a long-term deal. You got Kreider to a long-term deal. You get Zibanejad at center ice, who's clearly been excelling in the number 1 spot. If they can kind of solidify themselves down the middle a little bit better, then they have a really good budding blue line. That blue line's only going to get better too as the next year or so goes by, and they can move on from players like Mark Stahl and Brendan Smith, create more of a spot there for some younger guys to kind of jump in. It's going to be even better. They got their goaltending sorted out. The Rangers team are certainly in a spot where they could contend for a long, long time here in the not too distant future. So let me know your thoughts on what moves you expect out of this team for this offseason, and we can discuss further down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And stay tuned for the next team coming up in this list very soon as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.